With the launch of Beyond Light and now Season 13 underway, I wanted to review all of the Titan exotics in the game with respect to their effectiveness in PvP, in other words the Crucible. We'll be utilizing the well-known tier system, but before we get into the rankings, I wanted to explain some ground rules. For each exotic, the first ranking image I show is going to be with respect to its ability across the entire character. But a lot of people in the Discord and in the comments have been asking my opinion on these with respect to stasis specifically, so I'm actually going to flip to a stasis ranking after every single exotic as well. Second, when multiple exotics are in one tier, the order doesn't matter. In other words, if I put one at the far left of B tier, it's not my way of saying that it's better than the last one to show up in B tier. We'll be going through these in the order they show up in the collections with a mini demonstration of how they work as well as some background footage, but I'm aiming to keep each section as concise as possible for the sake of the video length. The third and likely most important point is that an exotic can play better with two things in mind. If you combine uniquely perfect build synergy with specific game strategy, an exotic can often perform better than its norm. People like Coolguy and Cammycakes are pioneers for demonstrating how very intentional playstyles can make an exotic shine. In other words, if I put something in the B tier, it's possible that a very minute or unique playstyle could make those perform at an A tier level. With all of this being said, I actually created a swappable tier. Credit to Cammycakes for that term, and I'll explain what it means when it comes up. My fourth and final point is that an exotic's effectiveness can be vastly different in varying game modes. For example, you could have an exotic absolutely slay out in 6s but be rather useless in trials, or vice versa. I've done my best to consider these rankings with a competitive lens, but try to comment on differences where I can. Now, before we jump in, I want to say a big thank you to everyone. We just crushed 15k subs, and stay tuned because my next video after this one is all about a big giveaway that we're going to do for the community and a Q&A session. So I'm really excited to give back to everyone, but without further ado, let's jump on to the first exotic, the Skullfort helmet. Kills with arc melee regen your health and fully restore it afterwards. The melee doesn't have to be charged. You just have to get a final blow with a punch and it'll fill the entire bar, meaning the next time you go to use that melee, you'll get whatever benefit on the subclass that you're using. At first, this sounds like a pretty appealing exotic, and you can have some fun with it if you're rocking shoulder charge. Like just the other day, we did a trials card using shoulder charges only, but in a competitive sense, it really goes to waste when it's restricted to being arc. With Bottom Tree Striker being the most competitive choice for an arc titan, it already covers the health regen aspect in spades, and although getting frontal assault back for each melee sounds incredible, enough VOD reviews showed me that it doesn't happen as much as you'd think, and you actually have your melee a lot more often than you'd think. If you rock top or middle tree, this can perform similar to a B tier exotic, but given the fact it's restricted to arc and then half of its benefit is obsoleted by bottom tree, I'm putting this in the C tier if I'm trying to guarantee a win. Regarding stasis, well, that doesn't count for arc, so F tier it is. Next up is Mask of the Quiet One. Ability charge boosts when you take damage and health regen if you kill while critically wounded. Notice when he hits me with the hand cannon, it boosts all three abilities, but on the second hand cannon shot it doesn't. We tested this quite a bit, and it seems there's anywhere from half to 2/3 of a second cooldown, which makes sense because if it procced off every bullet from an SMG, for example, it would be insane. The other thing we noticed is that it doesn't function when in the red, only when your health is considered non-critical. What I take that to be is if you take shield damage, it grants you ability energy, not necessarily health damage. Now look when I kill him with my health bar being in the red stage. I get some back shown above, but it's such a small amount, and that's because of the word health. You see, we're estimated to have 70 HP at base, and then our resilience value only affects the amount of shield that we have on top of that, which is the majority of our overall health bar. This is actually the exotic that sounds by far the best on paper, but for some reason it just isn't, and I believe it's because of these reasons mentioned. The ability charge is pretty noticeable in 6s, but in an endgame mode, like say you're taking these into trials, it's just a non-factor. I noticed the health regen never saved me from my second gunfight, so once I was in an engagement, it didn't ever change the overall outcome or provide me the ability to clutch up against another person thanks to this little boost. That being said, Destiny is strong in the abilities section, we all know that. Given its cons in a competitive nature, but pros in 6s or potentially survival, I'm putting this one in the B tier. And you might hear me mention a concept called passive support a couple of times today. What that means is you don't necessarily need to trigger something in order to get a benefit. This exotic, although it's certainly not S tier, is at least always working for you a little bit in every engagement. Next up is the Khepri's Horn. It reads that solar damage kills recharge your barricade, which unleashes a blast of solar energy when summoned. To be clear though, this does not require a solar ability kill. Any weapon that can do solar damage counts. At the time of this video, Fellwinter's is running Rampant in the Crucible, and that's solar. So you get a kill with it and your shield gets a boost, which by the way, I use interchangeable with Barricade all the time. Once you place that Barricade down, it'll deal 100 damage outwards for a short distance. When combining this exotic with a solar weapon and given the special ammo economy, you basically have your shield all the time. The problem though is that this benefit kind of became more obsolete with the release of Beyond Light. People are now running higher resilience all the time, especially on Titan, so you're already getting your Barricade pretty quick, meaning the diminishing return is even worse now. In competitive play, the fire on the ground does nothing. I'm putting this one in the D tier for both regular and stasis. Helm of Saint-14. Iceman pops his bubble, and since he has the helmet on, when I walk in, I'm blinded. Notice that the blindness reduces over time. I'm not sure why they'd consciously do that, but it doesn't matter since you'd be dead by then anyways. His teammates will also gain an overshield when they walk into this bubble thanks to him wearing it, but note that the second half of the perk talks about Sentinel Shield blinding enemies too. We tested guarding on Middle Tree, I'm standing right in it and I'm not blind at all. Then we thought maybe it has to be the bubble class with the guard, but same deal there. It's not working, so it's possible I'm missing something. Let me know in the comments why I'm having a brain fart here. This exotic is not a good piece overall for PvP. I will, however, throw it a bone and say that it can be a very fun and sometimes effective exotic to rock with your buddies for triple bubble shenanigans. If done correctly, this is an example where you could probably bump it up a tier from where I'm about to place it. In my opinion, this can make you learn less about the core fundamentals of PvP and prevent you from improving. It's going to be my first example of the swappable tier. What that means is you should be playing with something else throughout the entirety of the gameplay, but let's say you load into the next round of trials and you know you're going to pop your bubble, it can absolutely be worth it to put this on for that one round. Flipping over to stasis, this one is obviously F tier because it doesn't work. Next up is Eternal Warrior. Popping Fist of Havoc grants you an overshield. This is an even better example of a swappable. In general play, this is absolutely F tier, but it's literally S tier during the super. Messing around with this thing has won me countless of clutch super versus super battles. I cannot stress enough for the strikers out there, keep this on your character at all times for Crucible if you're doing something like comp or trials. In regards to Behemoth, well, sorry, we got another fat F tier. Ah yes, the one-eyed mask. When taking damage, your opponents get highlighted in red. This exotic used to be the absolute king because it would give you wall hacks, but now it's actually kind of annoying to have them highlighted. I personally hate that it does that. However, the important piece here is that when you kill them, look at the health bar. Not only does it give you an overshield, but it gives you an instant health buff, rendering some of those other Titan exotics completely obsolete. Even after being nerfed in the past, this exotic is without a doubt S tier. I'm not suggesting this thing needs to be nerfed again, it's just that any sample size is going to have something at the top and at the bottom. This is one of those top exotics, regardless of stasis or not, so S tier for both. Alright, so the Precious Scars is one of the newer exotics in the game. Bungie clearly made this to revolve around their Trials of Osiris game mode. Forgetting about the helmet for a second, if you go in and get a regular revive, you and your teammate are both going to have around 50 HP in overshield. It lasts around 2 seconds, I believe, and that's their way of trying to give you a fighting chance when you're getting rezzed or doing the rezzing. With this exotic though, it adds an additional 100 HP, so it actually does stack on top of that typical overshield. When you're wearing the helmet and you go and get a revive, it'll show that you're shielding your allies, so your team will get this overshield as long as they're within range, which is 15 meters. For the first 2 seconds, you're going to have that stacking overshield going on, so technically for 2 seconds, you can have upwards of 350 HP. Of course, once that first 2 seconds is over, now you're down to just the overshield caused by the exotic helmet. I mentioned the 15 meter distance, and you can see that by a tether in game. It also goes both ways. Let's say I'm not wearing the helmet, but my teammate is, who's downed. When I get the revive without the helmet, we're still going to benefit from these additional overshields because that's how the helmet works. And when it comes to rating this exotic, overall, I do not recommend wearing this throughout the entirety of a match. You're getting absolutely nothing out of it during regular gameplay. I also wouldn't recommend switching to it if one of your teammates goes down because you should really just be focused on the game itself. However, if you happen to go down and you're sitting there looking at your orb, like I said before, you could pop this on really quick so that when your teammates get your res, you guys have a pretty strong chance at making a comeback within that round. Precious Scars definitely fits the swappable tier instead of an overall ranking, and that goes for both regular and stasis. The AC feedback fence. When someone melees me, they take damage back, but they also do less damage, and those amounts change based on how many melees I've done before that event. At its base, let's say I've done nothing. If I get hit by their melee, say 100 damage to me, they'll take 40 damage in return. But let's say I had hit one melee before that happened. Suddenly, they only do 67 damage to me and they take 80 in return. This can go as high as 3 stacks, so if I've meleeed 3 people, then get hit, they'll take 160 in return and only do 30 to me. What's really cool is it isn't just the person hitting me. If other people are right there, they'll also take that damage. It's kind of like a lesser version of the Dunemarchers. When it comes to tier placement, this one's an interesting one. If they made the first level of stack the default amount, meaning I don't need to melee anyone else, this armor would be extremely good because suddenly I'm taking less than 100 damage on every melee. But even the way it is, I feel like it gets a bad rap. Using these in comp, trials, and 6s, then doing some VOD review after, it's better than you think. In 6s, when it's an absolute clusterfuck, you're dealing plenty of damage to those around you for your team to clean up. In comp or trials, if you go to make a play and say you die in the midst of it, there's still a chance you're leaving the opponent weak for your teammates to clean up, or you might even get the trade and leave it as a 2v2 and save that round from being an outnumbering situation. I will say though, at the absolute highest level of play, you're typically dying more to primary and special weapons than a melee, so I'm placing this one in the B tier instead of A. Regarding stasis, I've got it there too. Fang Pauldron. Getting a kill with a charged melee gives you an enormous amount of super. Just to really hit this home, at my resolution, the super bar is 457 pixels long. A regular kill gives you a 14 pixel boost, so picture that, 14 out of 457. With this exotic, catching them with that void melee kill gives you 82 pixels. Meaning it's nearly 6 times more super. The second half of the perk is when you're in your super, every time you get a bash kill, it instantly fills your shield throw. This is another exotic that required some additional VOD review to make my decision on the ranking. I remember way back my first impression that this thing would be broken, but it's actually pretty 50-50. Some trials matches are completely swayed because of the exotic if you happen to get 2 or 3 melee kills, but then as you go further into the card, the melee kill count goes down and down, or when I looked at a larger sample size of gameplay, you simply don't get that void charged melee kill as much as you'd think. Although a very unique playstyle, combining these with Ursa Furiosa can make them pretty slick, overall I put them in the C tier. Flipping over to stasis, right to the F tier. Synthos, a true mark of a Titan, am I right? That's because it buffs the melee range from the regular 5.5 up to 7 meters, which is definitely noticeable in game without a doubt. Now a regular melee does 100 damage, but if you have these on and a minimum of 3 enemies are around you, within 15 meters to be specific, Bionic Enhancements shows up on the left hand side of your screen and you'll do 185 damage on your next melee. The perk will stay active forever as long as they're within that 15 meters, but the neat thing is that if they do leave, you get to keep it for about 8 more seconds after that, and FYI, if there's more than 3 people, your damage doesn't keep going up, it stays at that base. For my ballistic slammers out there, the buff is enough to cross the kill threshold and do this. Now this is an exotic I've personally always thought was kind of overhyped. The damage buff has always been so rare, especially in 3s, because someone's usually dead and then you don't end up getting that bionic enhancements, so you end up just playing for the extra melee range. For that reason, even though a lot of people say this is one of their top exotics, it definitely doesn't deserve S tier. I'll admit the extra range in that melee has definitely saved me an abundance of times, so I'll let them inch their way up to A tier instead of bumping all the way down to B tier, and we'll call it a lucky day. But now when I talk about stasis, it needs its own explanation unlike the rest. The buff isn't a straight increase from 100 to 185 like I showed earlier. It's actually an 85% increase. And because of this, we end up with a special case using Shiver Strike on Behemoth. You see, at its base, it does 105, not 100. Bungie always rounds numbers, and I'm not here to talk decimals, but when you hit someone with Shiver Strike using Synthos, you will kill them up to 7 resilience in 1 hit. That's because you're adding 85% of 105 instead of 100. To top it off, there's a glitch going around right now. It doesn't happen because of Synthos or anything like that, but it's when you're wearing these gauntlets where this glitch matters the most, so this is where we're going to have an intermission to show it. In Behemoth, if you're up close to someone and you punch them, sometimes it'll do a bonus 45 damage. In fact, instead of the 105 we talked about earlier, it'll just do the regular 100 plus 45. It can happen wearing any armor piece, exotic or not. Like this footage in the background, I'm wearing a mix of Dunemarchers, Citans, and Legendary only. I can't say for certain, but after a ridiculous amount of testing, it seems to happen when you punch the front of your opponent's body while their aimer is on you. To be clear here, because I know it sounds ridiculous, it doesn't matter what armor I'm wearing, but every single time he had his reticle on my body and I punched him in the front, it was working. And then when he would take his aimer off, it wasn't. I'm sure there's more to a bug like this, but if that initial 7 resilience one-hit punch wearing Synthos wasn't enough with Shiver Strike, now you've got the bionic enhancements also cranking up this glitch sometimes too. Additionally, notice how the other two get frozen even though their health is full. It seems like the bug hits them with slow twice, and that causes them to freeze whenever I have this exotic on. Now this is supposed to be a tier list video, so that's enough for now. On Behemoth, because of how these pair with Shiver Strike, I just about went against my word and put them in S tier, but the reason I'm leaving them in A is because I still need 3 people around me, and that's just too situational to let them sit in the S tier category. We're jumping into Aeons next, but I just wanted to mention that a lot of the testing and footage that you see there comes from the amazing community that we've built in Discord. We're inching up to 2,000 members, so if you're looking for a place to find other people to play with, whether it be in comp, trials, or just regular PvE, I highly recommend you check out the Discord link in the description. Aeons are probably the most unique exotic armor at the moment just because of their recent rework. When you inspect them, you'll see an extra mod slot which allows you to choose different perk combinations based on what you're doing. There are 3 total options named Vigor, Force, and Insight. In the interest of time, I suggest checking my recent video for in-depth testing on all of them, but I'll mention the one that fits PvP the best, which is Vigor. It gives 3 benefits. Number 1, when I'm wearing them and I'm in a match, it doesn't matter if anyone else is wearing them at all, even though the description reads like that. Every single time a teammate dies, I literally get 25% of my class energy back. Imagine always having your dodge on a hunter in 6s, or in this case, your barricade. Of course, it's less applicable in something like trials because there's only 3 of you, but it's still pretty neat. Number 2 is that if my teammates also have the Aeon exotics on, part A is that when I res them, I'll get a full charge of my class item back. Part B, however, is that if I pop my super, they get an instant boost to their health. In fact, they could go from being one shot to instantly full health. Number 3 is the same scenario, but if they don't have the Vigor mod on, in other words, Bungie's way of encouraging a team to all wear these but use different mods, in addition to that health regen, they'll actually get an overshield too. Talking about tier placement on these is a bit tricky. For 6s, it can definitely be fun having your class item all the time, rendering some other exotics obsolete, arguing maybe a B tier, but ultimately they just don't deserve that, and instead they fit better in the swappable category. Because let's say you're in trials and it's a close match, and you know you're gonna pop your super for the next round. The 3 of you toss on Aeons in between the 2 rounds, just like the Eternal Warrior for example, and then this way when you go to pop your super, your teammates are gonna have an overshield for 20 seconds and basically guarantee that round win. For these reasons, I felt it fit better here. For Stasis, it's the same deal because it works over there too. The Ashen Wake gauntlets are a prime example of the funky build note I made in the intro. By default, these are very mediocre, but when you pair these with Middletree Sunbreaker and exploit that perk called Roaring Flames, as well as pairing them with Ashes to Assets mods, they make for some hilarious plays. At its base, it gives you fastball, which is cool in itself, and then it makes fusions blow up on impact, meaning you can confidently make plays knowing it'll do damage even when it doesn't stick them. If you're lucky to get the final blow, it gives you your nade back, and now you're in this beautiful cycle. Look at this clip showing the lethality of when you get Roaring Flames to stack up to a one-hit situation and then get your super nearly instantly. For tier placement, although that one specific build pushes its limits to A tier in 6s, or maybe B tier in comp, it is such a playstyle lock and ultimately deserves a C tier rating for overall PvP in my opinion. Of course, flipping over to Stasis, this one being solar, it belongs in the F tier. Wormgods revolve all around the melee. When you get a final blow with your melee, you'll notice Burning Fist pops up on the left hand side. When that's on screen, you have extra melee damage and it'll last for 5 seconds because the 00 counts. In its first stack, it matches the Synthos, so you do 185, and then if you happen to get a kill with your melee on that stack, you'll see it go to ×2 and it'll give you an extra 5 seconds to find some poor schmuck and do even more damage. The stacks are shown on screen. Now you can definitely have some fun with these, kind of like Ashen's if you pair it with Middletree Sunbreaker using the Roaring Flames to your advantage, because you can one-hit people with your hammer. You go pick up the hammer, you throw it, you have some fun. Funny enough, it'll stack with Roaring Flames and you can literally have an 1800 damage throwing hammer. But regardless of that fun build, if you get enough stacks, you can even one-hit a behemoth, for example, if you're lucky. The problem is, well, you probably won't get lucky because they'll just freeze you from afar. These really end up being in the C tier. It ticks me off because they could so easily be buffed. For example, if one stack could just do 200 instead of 185 and guarantee you a one-hit punch to your second opponent, or maybe if I had like 8 seconds instead of 5 seconds in that window, it would be so much better. Looking back at my VODs, it was crazy how often I missed extending that window by just a few seconds. It's really frustrating. No different for the Stasis subclass, also C tier. Ursa Furiosa. When you're on Middle Tree Sentinel using the big shield, Ursa gives you your super back from blocking damage. More on this in a second. It says you move faster, which is true, but it's so minor, I don't even know why they call this out. This exotic is just like Eternal Warrior, where if you have it on for the whole game, it's complete dog shit almost 90% of the time. But then suddenly, if you swap this on for your super, it becomes an S tier swappable. In the background have been a couple of examples just to show how much super you can come back out of. Right now, Geomags on Chaos Reach is all the hype, and with good reason probably because it's busted, but this one can give you an impressive amount if you pop it at the right time. For example, I'll highlight the one where Iceman barely has time to shoot me at the end of my super, and I still get like 40% of it back. Tier placement overall 100% swappable only, and F tier for stasis because it doesn't work. Stronghold. This one revolves around the sword. Now, if you're taking damage, you instinctively block. When wearing these, it will heal you, and then the remaining sword block can keep you alive. It has a finicky nuance though. If you're taking damage and then a tiny window of time goes by where you didn't take damage before you block, it doesn't work. Of course, as I mentioned though, you would instinctively block when taking damage, so it should work almost every time. Regarding tier placement, well, unless you're wearing a sword, which has sadly been completely ruined by 3-peaking, it's trash in PvP. I don't think it quite deserves that though, because you're not going around trying to do damage with your sword in regular gameplay, so I'm putting it in the swappable category because you can make some pretty big plays with this using Black Talon if you happen to pick up heavy. Same spot for stasis. Onto the Citan's Ramparts. These let you shoot through your barricade at the cost of lower HP. Your opponents can break it by doing 400 damage instead of the default 600. I'll note that your teammates can also shoot through your barricade, and the shield looks a little bit different, so it does give your opponents a chance to react. I used to think this was a meme exotic when it first came out, but I was simply wrong and I didn't give it the chance it deserved. The main reason I don't love it is because it promotes the opposite of movement, I feel. It's sort of like with my brand new puppy right now, I reward him for sitting down. And Destiny's #1 skill gap is actually movement. So I really don't like that aspect of this exotic. However, this isn't about what I like or dislike, it's about how good these things can be. And this is the one piece of armor I really want to put it in multiple areas, because let's say one of the best Titans took this into a tournament. They would almost never get to use the benefit of this exotic in any of their engagements because of how good their opponents are. Survival in comp is another example of where these things can feel amazing one match and then awful the next. It always depends on who I'm playing. If I'm in trials up against some loser rocking 98% headshot accuracy on their sniper, this exotic will single-handedly allow me to win that game. For that type of an environment, I would rank this S tier, but for the majority of the player base, in the majority of the situations that we all run into, whether it be in sixes or comp or trials, I simply cannot give it an S tier and I have to bump it down to an A tier because there are better choices out there. My one tip to you before I move on is that if you are using these, try not to think about your shield 24/7. Just play regularly, and when you pop your shield, recognize that you have the opportunity to shoot other players through it. Icefall Mantle. This perk replaces your barricade with 100 HP overshield that lasts either 20 seconds or until you lose it to damage. When you pop it, enemies within 8 meters will be slowed, giving you a chance to get the kills you're hoping for. The downside is you move incredibly slow and you can't even slide or glide. While the overshield is active, your class ability does not charge, but once the overshield is gone, regardless of the 20-second rule, it'll start to charge again. Another downfall to this is that it takes twice as long for you to get it back. So for example, with 5 Rezeal, I might get my shield every 30 seconds, but an Icefall overshield activation won't come back for nearly a minute. It's worth noting that of course it still scales with resilience, so if you rock 10 Rezeal, you can reduce that down, but that means you're losing out on other areas of your build. Lastly, if an enemy procs their Icefall, they will be highlighted in red, so you'll know. This is another example of looking very sexy on paper, and I think I even remember on Twitter, everyone was saying it was going to be the most OP thing ever, but it's actually the opposite in game. I want to like it, I really do, and yes, it can make a play. For example, at the end of a trials round, if you get to that situation where you're trying to cap the flag, this is excellent for popping in that 1v1 where you have 300 HP versus them maybe at 200, but the reality is that if they're good, they're just going to take pot shots at your overshield anyways, and since it doesn't regen, the benefit is lost. Especially with stasis around, they'll probably just throw a grenade at you and try to freeze you. Unfortunately, this one gets the D tier overall. If the cooldown wasn't doubled, or maybe if it had a baby with Khepri's horn, I think maybe it could creep up to C, even B tier, because you could evade and pop whenever someone pushes you. However, I'll take this opportunity to recommend Coolguy's video. I mentioned him at the start, and he made one build that can make this thing work using Sunbreaker. Crest of Alpha Lupi has 2 main functions. Number 1, it gives you an additional orb on your super, but it is limited. Most people's minds go to bubble because it drops 4 orbs instead of 3, but just to be clear, if I pop Behemoth, normally you wouldn't get an orb on your first kill, right? You need to wait for that second one. But when you have this on, all it does is it guarantees you an orb on that first kill. After that, it's the exact same. It's 1 orb per kill. You're not going to run around getting 2 orbs on every kill. That's probably a good thing though, because could you imagine a behemoth making 2 orbs for every single kill? That would be even more broken than it already is. The second part is kind of like a scuffed worm husk. When popping your barricade, you get a good chunk of health back, and the beauty is that your teammates do too. Kutsu has it on right now, and he pops his shield while I'm weak, and there you have it, my health goes up even when I'm not wearing it myself. For tier placement, on paper this one might sound mediocre, but it's actually pretty decent. I made a Titan video last year explaining just how good the barricade can be and how to play around it. You can win a lot of fights when playing around your barricade properly, and wearing this chest piece only amplifies that. You can reset engagements from a health perspective pretty often, and you can catch people off guard as well because they're typically only launching themselves over the shield to try and finish you off if they think you're one shot. Sometimes I feel like this thing deserves an A tier, but against higher level players, typically I'll end up using my shield for perspective instead of a way to try and save my life like a worm husk would. So ultimately I'm slinging it in B tier for both regular and stasis. Actium War Rig is hilariously fun. It constantly reloads your auto rifle or machine gun. It's slower than the rate of fire, so it isn't infinite, but just imagine a disgustingly large clip to your gun basically. I must say it's pretty fun to meme around in 6s with it using the Sweet Business, or really any good AR for that matter, like the Gnawing Hunger. A little PvE insight is that it works with Xeno as well. Something annoying but understandable is that it negates kill clip. I have an amazing Gnawing Hunger with that perk, and could you imagine if I had kill clip constantly without actually having to do the animation? But I totally get it. I was torn between rating this one a C tier and a D tier. Auto rifles already have decently sized clips in general. Additionally, playing with the mindset of infinite ammo tends to translate to you just dying. I suppose with the Suros regime you could argue it as a C tier, but ultimately I'm tossing it in D tier overall. On the off chance someone from Bungie watches this, please include SMGs on this exotic. Hallowfire revolves around charging your solar nade and melee. It has 3 stages. First off, let's just imagine you're not wearing it. Say you've got tier 5 discipline and you're going to get your grenade back at a specific rate. Well, you put on Hallowfire and right out the gate, you're going to get your nade back 50% faster. Or another way to think of it is 1.5 times faster. Stage 2, however, is when your super is charged. So you're wearing your exotic, your super bar is full, but you haven't used it yet. It now charges 250% faster, or in other words, 3.5 times faster. Then lastly, when you do pop your super, your abilities charge even faster. It's something like 300% almost, or roughly 4 times faster. Now all of this sounds great, but big old pessimistic Castle's got a dumpster on it, doesn't he? Maybe I save it with a swappable tier? I don't know. I really do like that when I wear this, I can spec way less into discipline and strength, leaving more for recovery, intellect, resilience, almost giving it just off that reason alone the capability of a B tier. But the problem is that Heart of Inmost Light kicks this thing to the curb so much. And when an exotic's whole purpose is fully squandered like that, it might as well not exist. So I'm tossing it in the C tier. Of course, Stasis gets another one added to the F tier category. Arma, the simplest of them all. Gain an additional grenade, period. No, this does not give you 3 grenades on top tree striker. Say I'm on Behemoth and I load into a match, I'll start off with 2 grenades. That's simple. I throw my first one, it immediately starts charging. I still have that second one as backup. If I throw my second one though, unfortunately the game doesn't treat it like I have 2 grenades that are charging simultaneously. It actually just charges one at a time. The benefit ends up coming when you have a grenade charge done, you're passively charging your second one without really thinking about it. I have a love-hate relationship with this exotic. You probably think I'm about to throw this thing in D tier because of how basic it is, but the simple fact that grenades are so strong in Destiny and this gives you double of that literally makes it an A tier because of how well they work in every level of play. The hatred part of our relationship is that it mentally changes how I play and it makes me worse. I become so focused on using my sweet-ass X-Grenade ability that I forget to just stick to the fundamentals of winning a match, or I end up using them both right away, and now this exotic is completely useless until I go long enough to not even use my grenade twice. For this reason, I'm pushing it down to B tier in regular, but with how much stronger yet grenades are in Stasis, if you learn to play with these better than me, and you spec your build appropriately, they can definitely hang with the A tiers simply due to how busted some of the Stasis grenades are. Heart of Inmost Light. There's a lot to this one and it likely warrants a video on its own, but I'm going to try and speed demon my way through this with some info on screen and the test footage in the background. It revolves around your 3 abilities. Using one of them will empower the other two. Think of empowerment as simply being better. It can mean damage, regen speed, even the health of your barricade. For example, I can make a regular 150 lightning nade do up to 195 or even 254 damage. If you notice in the left-hand screen, you saw ×2. It can stack, but more on that in a second. First off, here are some ways to get empowerment going. Number 1, you could pop a shield alone. It'll start the empowerment, and note that it'll last 10 seconds. Number 2, you can throw a nade anywhere. Doesn't need to hit or kill anybody. It'll start the empowerment. Number 3, you can melee, but it has to hit. It will not work if you don't hit, but it is worth noting that it doesn't need to be charged. Back to stacking. It exists, but it can be finicky. So I've actually just decided to put the 6 scenarios on screen. Green text means it works, red means it will not. So now let's go back to what empowerment does. Well, it's going to add 10% damage to my melee. So if I go and shiver somebody, I'll do 116 instead of the usual 105. A regular melee will do 110 instead of 100. Interestingly enough though, the grenade gets a 30% damage buff, and that's why that intro video showed you the different damage amounts. The lightning nade went from 150 up to 195 up to 254. Now what about the shield? Let's say I throw my grenade first, then I pop my shield while it's empowered. It'll go up to 800 hit points instead of 600. Lastly, if all of this wasn't enough, it also buffs your regen time. Whenever I use one ability, the other two are going to start regenning up to 75% faster. So if the increased damage isn't your fancy, think of the fact that you can cycle through your abilities so much faster now. I know Destiny's in a really bad spot with ability spam right now, but hey, I'm just here to show the facts. Now, before I get on to ranking it, I thought I would show you guys how it affects crystal damage. If you remember, pre-Shiver's nerf, shattering a crystal would do 84 damage at its base. Then if you had that Fissure's Fragment on, it would do an additional 42 damage for a total of 126. Then they came along and they nerfed fissures both in the range and the damage department. So now if you do that, you'll see the same 84 base from shattering the crystal, plus an extra 30 for the fragment for a total of 114 damage. Well, an empowered grenade also means empowered crystal damage. Without fissures, that base goes up 30%, so from 84 to 110. Thank God fissures does not get affected by the empowerment, but still, if you take that 110 base plus the 30 from fissures, you're now doing 140 damage per crystal shatter with 1 stack of empowerment. Looking at the scenario with 2 stacks of empowerment, your grenade will do as high as 172 damage for shattering 1 crystal. This exotic is hands down an S tier piece of armor, and it's not just because of stasis. It can better every single subclass in the game, and it is likely the most underrated Titan exotic in the game. Not only does it do everything I just showed, but with how insane supers are right now, this exotic can also allow you to spec a lot lower into your abilities, because you know you can cycle through them and get them back faster anyways, and spec way higher into intellect so that you get your super more often. S tier without a doubt, but let's get on to the next one. Severance emits this wave, or I guess dome of damage when you kill someone with your melee. The dome has this orange looking tint to it, and it extends up to 10 meters. This does not require a charged melee. Every single time you get a melee kill, this will happen. Oddly enough, it isn't instant though, which kind of sucks, and I'll talk about that more in a second. Right up close, it'll do 200 damage, but it does have some pretty significant drop off. Just inside of 10 meters, it does around 100, but there's like a cliff right around the 4-meter section. Honestly though, I love these, and I feel like I'm the only one. You can make a lot of plays because of it. I've clutched so many 1v2s that I had no business winning because of this dome of damage helping me out. What really sucks though is this delay. Sometimes you end up getting your final blow with your melee, and before this wave of damage goes to kill the second person, they end up killing you. That part can be really frustrating sometimes. One cool bonus though is how Middle Tree Sunbreaker can take advantage of this using throwing hammers and again roaring flames. Coolguy's got a video on that one. I'm putting this one in the B tier for regular and F tier for stasis since it doesn't work there. Don't worry, I did not forget. Our last chess piece is the Cuirass of the Falling. No idea if I said that right. This one's all about Thunder Crash. You know, that Missile Titan super. When you're wearing this exotic, after you pop that super and once you hit the ground, you'll get a bonus 100 HP overshield. So you don't get it while you're in the air, it's after you hit the ground. The catch here is that you can change the length of time you have the overshield. So let's say you were to use your super and immediately smash into the ground. You'll get a minimum of 8 seconds of overshield after you come out of that animation. Now that length of time is extended depending on how long you're in the air flying as that missile. When you're flying in the air, that super bar is draining, right? So if I was in the air for the entirety of the whole super, then I hit the ground, I'll have my overshield for a full 20 seconds. Now, I didn't go and test the exact relationship of how this works, but I'm guessing it's linear. 8 seconds minimum, 20 seconds maximum, maybe 14 seconds if you hit the ground right when you're halfway through your super, so on and so forth. There's a part 2 though, and it's all about damage increase. For PvP, that really doesn't matter, because even with a basic Thunder Crash, you can kill, say, a behemoth with maximum resilience, so this exotic really doesn't do anything on that front from Crucible perspective. But in PvE, it's kind of nutty. Here's a clip directly from one of Fallout's recent videos on it. I highly recommend you go and check out his video. The link is in the description below, and he shows his team absolutely annihilate the Primeval in Gambit. Very cool exotic. I'm sure a lot of teams are going to come up with scenarios where they can just take down whatever it is in PvE that they want with either 3 or 6 of these things. But anyways, for Crucible, this is 100% a swappable, nothing else. As for Stasis, it gets an F tier because it doesn't work there. Lion Rampants do 3 things. First off, you get a way longer jump, or for Titan Skaters, it adds an extra boost, so if you like zooming around on Catapult, give these a shot, you can really get flying. While in air, you have better directional control as well, which is pretty sweet. Then on top of those 2 things, it also gives you good hipfire accuracy. This is kind of funny because I have no idea why they focus on hipfire specifically. If they made it so you had perfect in-air accuracy regardless, it would allow you to forego the whole Icarus mod on your weapons, which would be a huge incentive, but the fact it's hipfire only deters it. Unless, of course, you rock the last word. In other words, it makes that thing incredible. One thing I say a lot in my videos is that movement is the #1 skill gap in Destiny, and this kind of gives you a snippet of it, but it tends to make you a bit more floaty than anything. After giving these a real shot, I can confidently say they aren't S or A tier when it comes to playing at a competitive level, but they're definitely a B tier rating because they allow you to cover ground extremely quickly, meaning better map control or teammate support. With respect to Stasis though, having that fast slide and melee for movement, the returns from this exotic are diminished quite a bit, and I would actually place them in the C tier. Peacekeepers. I consider these a sleeper exotic. They revolve all around SMGs. Think Dragon's Shadow, but non-stop. You have the fastest handling out there with instant ready ADS speeds. I'm not even going to bother showing percentage increases for these speeds because it's that quick and you simply need to use them to get what I mean. When you put the SMG away, it reloads it, so say you swap to a shotgun or a sniper, then switch back, you're good to keep shooting immediately. It's crazy fun running double SMGs with these in 6s, and they're ultimately an aggressive player's dream. There's a reason why Calico has countless clips that get thousands and thousands of views on Twitter using these alongside his god-rolled Antaeus. By now in the video, you may have noticed a pattern with my rankings. Exotics that pigeonhole you to a specific build or play have been on the lower end because I focus a lot more on core gameplay, but these are good enough to break that barrier and sit in the B tier even though they're restricted to SMGs. I cannot stress enough that depending on where SMGs fall in the meta, these could be A or S tier. Even a slight buff would put these in A tier right now. Dunemarchers, Dunemarchers, Dunemarchers. These have 3 main perks. Number 1, they increase your sprint speed, which even though it's a small amount, less than 10%, has single-handedly saved me in so many fights while I disengage. Number 2, they increase your slide, which in itself was amazing until of course Stasis came along and kind of gave you that with Cryoclasm. Third, they emit a chain of 80 damage to nearby enemies when you melee someone after sprinting. Opposite to the Mask of the Quiet One, these ones are way better in-game than they sound on paper. It sounds like some stupid shoulder charge thing where you have to sprint for a long time to maybe activate the perk, but it actually procs instantly from starting your sprint. I do think Astacross put out a video talking about how these are bugged right now in Season 13, but putting that bug aside, I've had a ridiculous amount of engagements where I'm clearly done sprinting, and then a short little while after that, I end up meleeing someone and chaining all of their teammates. The best part is the range was buffed to 20 meters in any direction.
Let's go, baby!
Putting that into perspective, look how far apart the people can be in these clips. And lastly, it works in your supers melee, sometimes causing this to happen. These are undoubtedly a top exotic. I will say Stasis shadows the movement perk a little bit, but they are still S tier in my books. MK44s. As long as you're on one of the 3 shoulder charge classes listed, you'll get an overshield while sprinting, and then if you hit someone with it, half of your melee comes back, which is neat because it effectively doubles your melee charge speed. Sadly though, this tactic in general is just awful. Not only is this exotic annoying because it pigeonholes you to these subclasses that already aren't great, if you go into a match that you absolutely must win and you're relying on shoulder charges for your gameplay, you're doing something wrong. Okay, that sounded harsh. I've played some insanely talented Sunbreakers who use charges as movement, and I actually respect that a lot, but this exotic is not required. I can't give it anything better than D tier overall, and of course for stasis it's an F tier because Shiver Strike doesn't count as a shoulder charge. Ah yes, the Antaeus Wards, the bane of everyone's existence in the past. The improved slide is sweet. As shown on screen, it boosts it from 5 to 7 meters, just like the Dunemarchers. When you perform that slide, you get a mini reflecting shield. Essentially anything thrown at you will bounce back at them as incoming fire. Another one sounding incredible on paper, but they were nerfed in the past given how insanely broken they were back then. An example of how they were nerfed is the cooldown now, meaning they won't activate on every single slide, or you won't have that shield every time. Fallout Plays, another top tier content creator, did a whole video on why these things are so finicky with the timing of their reflection and not as good as some people think. That said, they are pretty good if you have a very AP playstyle and you're committing to that play. Intentionally playing around this shield can be pretty good. I've blocked a lot of shotgun backpedals with it, or when I'm playing a hacker similar to Citan, this is one of the ones I can equip to constantly cross or be able to challenge with a bit more confidence. The main issue I have with these is they make me play really dumb. I swear I put these on and suddenly I lose half my brain cells. I'm not saying that to offend anybody, but it's like as soon as I put these on, if my W key wasn't worn out before, it's damn near broken now. On a macro level with these exotics, they tend to lead to more stupid deaths for me than they do being the one reason they may have saved me. For this reason, my personal rating is a C tier. But if you were simply to forget that you were wearing these and only use them with intent if you know you have a safe moment to slide in and shotgun someone, they can play at a B tier level. Oh, and note, when you're hovering over these without inspecting them, it says it still gives you super energy, but that's not the case. Next up, Peregrine Greaves. Did I say that right? I don't know. While in the air, those shoulder charges I talked about earlier deal more damage. Clips you might see out there are when they take down a super, which I'll admit is fun. Without these on, if I go and do a shoulder charge with this Dawnblade, I do 99 damage. But then when these are equipped, I'll actually do 250 damage. Keep in mind, these numbers use the damage reduction of the Dawnblade. That's it. Dog shit exotic. I'm sorry for anyone's feelings again, but these things are stupid. I almost wanted to save these by putting them in the swappable category because you can kill a super, but any good player in their super is likely going to beat you anyways, especially in the new stasis ones. D tier for regular, F tier for stasis. Phoenix feeds off of Sun Warrior, a perk from Bottom Tree Sunbreaker, and it really helps amplify it. Forgetting about the exotic for a second, by the subclass's default, when passing through a sunspot, your damage goes up, your abilities charge faster, and you know what, I'll just say it becomes a lava game for your opponents if you start getting kills. Now the way people usually talk about that is by the fact that you have to stand in the sunspot. The reality is you can leave those sunspots, you just only have 5 seconds, so it ends up not really chaining. Kind of like how Wormgods were ruined by that 5-second window. This exotic extends Sun Warrior from 5 seconds to 10 seconds, meaning whenever you leave that sunspot, you have 10 more seconds to keep that cycle going. This is really huge for that subclass because it enables you to move around more freely. The second half of these boots are the fact that it can give it to your teammates. In this clip, Kutsu has created a sunspot, he's wearing the exotic, I'm on Defender Titan not wearing the exotic, I walk through it and I have Sun Warrior. Definitely a team player exotic. Sunshine and rainbows, right? But VOD reviews changed my mind here as well. At first, these can feel A tier and 6s, but it's masked by how good Sun Warrior already is, and these end up being quite niche. When your whole team wears them, they definitely hang with B tier exotics, but VOD reviews highlighted the fact that these do nothing for you or your team until you get that sunspot going. And against really great players, it's way more rare than you think. Of course, if you could create a sunspot just by getting any kind of weapon kill, then all of a sudden these would be busted or it would hang with Behemoth pretty easily. But alas, that is not the case. I'm putting these in the C tier. For stasis, of course they don't work, so F tier it is. That sums up where I think all the Titan exotics land along that spectrum within PvP specifically. I hope you enjoyed it or found some of the demonstrations helpful, and I want to say a big thank you to everyone in the Discord who's always helping me test things last minute or get a quick clip here and there. So I wanted to put some of those names down below and just remind everybody that if you did enjoy it, be sure to subscribe if you're looking to improve in Crucible or just general FPS. Liking the video or dropping a comment to give me feedback are huge ways for me to keep improving. And yeah, I'm excited for the next video so we can do the giveaway for the community as well as set up the Q&A. Take care and I'll see you in that one.